Fort Hueneme Water Agency regular meeting to order here on October 21st, 2019. Could we have the roll call, please?
Member Hernandez.
Present.
Member Rollins.
Here.
Ex officio member Jacobson.
Here.
Vice Chair Bouchard.
Here.
Member Marcus. Absent for the record. And Chair Munoz-Schnapp.
Here. All right, so thank you. We have a quorum. And we will then move on to public comment on the agenda. So anyone in the public wishing to speak on matters not on the agenda may do so at this time. And I don't believe I see anyone in the audience who would like to do that. So let's move on to the agenda approval. Should say for Water Agency. And for this meeting. So would anybody like to make a motion?
Move to approve. Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, motion carries unanimously. Agenda is approved. Next, we have a presentation from United Water Conservation District, the Groundwater team. And Mr. City Manager, would you like to introduce the guests?
Sure. Thank you, Chair. We have this afternoon for the presentation on kind of overall groundwater conditions and some specific issues that have to do with our water season. Chris?
I'm John, sorry.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
And one of our engineers, Robert Richardson, will talk about the iron and manganese treatment system.
Great, okay. And they'll be presenting to us. Why don't you let us know if you want questions during the course of the presentation or if you'd like us to wait till the end. And we've allocated quite a bit of time so that we will have time for questions from the board.
Okay, well, thank you, Chair and board members. Again, John Lindquist from United Water Conservation District. I'm a senior hydrogeologist there, and I'll be giving the first part of the presentation. You can ask questions at any point. It's an informal group and an informal presentation. It sounds great to me if you have questions that we get them settled. And then Robert Richardson will talk about the iron and manganese treatment system for the OH system. We were requested to also touch on that. And it was suggested to me by our coordinator, and I think your general manager had a part in it, that we start with a little icebreaker. In fact, here's my outline. Sorry. Let's go. Start with an icebreaker regarding rainfall in water year 2019, and then I'll dive into the presentation with a brief primer on the region's water supply, our 2019 releases of water from Castaic and Piru lakes and their impacts on the groundwater basins. What does the future hold for all of us? And then Robert will come up and talk about the iron and manganese treatment. And the icebreaker is something we do at United every year for our staff. At the beginning of the water year, it's a new year, by the way, it's a new water year, it just started a couple weeks ago. And what we do at United is we have everybody estimate or guess, really, what they think the rainfall will be in the coming water year. How much rain will we get in the coming water year? And rather than try to pull that off here, and in 12 months at United, we'll come back and see who guessed best. Rather than try to hold you all in suspense for 12 months, I'm hoping nobody has been paying that close of attention. So we're going to ask you to estimate rainfall for the past water year and what its significance is, if you're okay with that, if you're willing. And I even have a small prize for the winner, the person who comes closest. So if each chairman, maybe we'll start here with Mr. Jacobson, wants to take a step. Oh, and before we do that, let me give you some background. We don't expect United staff to just be able to estimate off the tops of their heads or out of the blue what rainfall might have been. So let me just say the average over the last 128 years has been 13.63 inches over the course of a year, so a little bit of over a foot of rainfall. The maximum we've ever seen in 1998 was almost 36 inches. By the way, Seattle gets 37.5 inches, so almost as much as Seattle that year. And then the minimum 3.75 is a little bit right around the average in Death Valley. So in a really dry year, we're a desert, basically. So with that background material, we'll start with Mr. Jacobson. And if you already know the answer because you really follow this closely, maybe you want to give your other board members a chance.
That's a good idea. I'm actually a hydrologist, so I'm not going to.
You're well aware.
I abstain. 18 and a half.
18 and a half, okay.
The price is right.
It's going to be closest one, so you can overshoot it and you'll still win.
9 inches.
Okay.
Wow.
6.5.
6.5 inches? Okay.
Wow, I was going to go way higher. I'll
let's say it's 26.3.
Okay.
Thought we got along.
And do you want to let your city manager or your attorney play the game?
Sure.
I'll go 19 inches.
I'll go 11 and a half.
All right. And Nathan, are you going to excuse yourself from this competition? Okay, so it was Councilmember Rollins. It was, you guessed 18 and a half. The actual number was 16.62 inches.
Wow, wow.
So,
All right.
I got 6 in mine.
16.5.
Boy, you really want that prize.
so that's for the city of, the gauge at Port Hueneme. That's the number. I had 16.62. Mr. Jacobson, you thought it might be 16 and a half, I think. But yeah, it might be a different gauge. And there's some significance watershed-wide there. So this leads into, it's a good way to start the story for this water year and to just understand water in general in the basin. So I'm just going to have a brief overview of where we get our water and how it affects this year's averages and this year's water supply. So real quick, this map shows Ventura County, United's service area, and let's see if I can get the pointer to work. Okay, good. It shows, well, it's not the best system, but United's service area in the orange lines. And as you can see in the little caption off to the right, the watershed area for the Santa Clara River, which is actually the source of most of the water, most of the groundwater that's used in the area, is 1,634 square miles and extends almost out to Palmdale. And the significance of that is, with all the mileage, and even though we only got 16 inches of rainfall here, in an average year, where we get about 13 inches, there's 1.6 million acre feet of water that falls each year in that watershed. That seems like a lot of water. A lot of folks know that, hey, if we could just use all the solar power that falls on the planet in the course of a day, we could supply the entire planet for a year. Of course, it's not realistic. You can't cover the entire planet with photovoltaic cells. And when it comes to water, there's just no way to capture it all. Most of it evaporates within days or even hours of when it falls. A little bit seeps into the groundwater basins, which will be an important part of our story coming up. And so ultimately, only about 15% of what falls in our watershed in an average year flows down the river and down the streams and makes it to Freeman diversion. And most of that goes beyond Freeman diversion and reaches the sea. We capture about 70,000 acre feet of that, and we divert it to our groundwater basins or to surface water pipelines. And ultimately, that's where the groundwater supply for the basins comes from, for the local groundwater basin and the OH system. So the next slide, these are those groundwater basins that lie within our region, fed by the watershed. And I'm going to start with Oxnard Basin. And there's Port Hueneme down there in the middle, or at the southern end near the beach in the middle of the circle. Oxnard Basin, that's our groundwater basin, but also shown on the map are some of the others. There are several along the river, the Santa Clara River, all feeding into our area, and the Las Posas and Pleasant Valley basins. So that's just kind of the background of where we are. Next slide, and it shows the names of the basin, and our Freeman diversion, which is so important to the regional water supply, which I'll touch on again in a moment. Zooming in on the map a little more, specifically to the Oxnard Plain, focusing on the Oxnard Subbasin, the Pleasant Valley Basin, and the Forebay. All that water that we divert and recharge into the ground in the Forebay area up here in our spreading basins, that spreads outward, underground, through the aquifers and feeds a lot of wells and goes to fight against seawater intrusion. And this next map I show, well, we put in all that water, where does it go? Why isn't it all discharging to the ocean? It's because we have a lot of wells. Each of these little yellow dots represents a groundwater extraction well that's been active in the last, about 15, 20 years. The blue dots show United's wells. The green dots show Pleasant Valley County Water District's wells, and the yellow dots show all of the other wells in the basins of concern. So that groundwater we recharge, ultimately all of that water and more is extracted by these wells. Each yellow dot there, the size of the yellow dot represents how much they pump. But you can see there are a lot of wells, and they're extracting even right up to the close, and that's a real challenge.
I have a question. So the method of extraction is both from the groundwater and rain? Is that how they extract the water?
So of the water that falls in the region, the we divert water from the Santa Clara River into our recharge basins, and then that flows into the aquifers. It's basically like a sandbox. And then so all of that water that's taken back out of the aquifers is through wells, pumping wells, groundwater supply wells. Now rainfall, the nice thing about a good wet year or having some rainfall is that provides a little bit of irrigation for plants, natural irrigation. When it's raining, people don't need to put water on their strawberry fields or your home landscaping either. Hopefully everybody is turning off your water, your landscape systems when it rains. We're all supposed to be doing that. So, sorry, I went the wrong way. Is there a way to go? I'm using the wrong button here. I'm going to go back just a little. So the advantage to United's releases and the artificial recharge operations we do that provides most of the groundwater supply in the Pleasant Valley and Oxnard basins is that it provides really low-cost water for local agriculture in cities. Imported water typically costs about $1,500 an acre foot. And I know you guys pay for some of that, the imported water from the State Water Project, as does Oxnard. Farms really can't do it, but both cities and agriculture take advantage of that low-cost groundwater and take as much as they can, which we certainly encourage. And that provides a solid economic base for Ventura County. It allows residents to maintain, to have this agricultural landscape that everybody seems to want around them. And I certainly enjoy looking at the strawberry fields and the berry farms. Short farm-to-table distances, and I want to add a plug for the environmental work we do. All this water that is collected, that falls in our watershed and then is collected by United and recharged, that's all the very basic solar power. That's the sun heating up the ocean and naturally distilling the water, bringing it in as rainfall. So that's pure water, no cost, no energy effort really whatsoever to apply it or divert it. You use a little energy to pump it out of the ground. But it takes about 10 times as much energy, which means 10 times as much greenhouse gases, to import water from the State Water Project up over the Tehachapi Pass. So that's a lot of energy requirement. And a lot of folks talk about, hey, why don't we just do seawater desal, for example? And that takes about 20 times as much energy as what we do. Not saying that imported water isn't important or that desal may not become important to us in the future, but to the extent that we can take advantage of this natural gift of fresh water falling out of the sky, I think it's beneficial to our environment that we continue to do so. But there is a downside to what we've done. I mentioned that we're actually pumping more water than United, or not our community is pumping more water than United is able to recharge. And what that's done, because this is a cross-sectional view, kind of a cartoon cross-sectional view, and where we have these wells, let's see if I can do this. Deep wells are extracting more water than is being recharged, so that means that the water table drops. And the water table has dropped below sea level inland across much of the Oxnard Plain. And when that happens, what that means is seawater can flow inward. The aquifers outcrop out underneath the ocean floor. Seawater can come in and displace all that excess water that we're pumping. And so that's bad news. It hasn't really come that far inland to date, but it's something that we're all concerned about. And because of that, the state has declared that the Oxnard Basin, which is the basin we're in here in Port Hueneme, and my city, I'm from the big city of Oxnard. I'm a big city slicker. And then Pleasant Valley Basin next door, they're critically overdrafted. They're considered in critical overdraft by the state. And I'll touch in a few minutes on why that's so important. The other basins in our area are not considered critically overdrafted. So this year, finally, getting around to this year, it took 15 minutes to get here, apologies. I want to talk about our releases this year. This is the first great water year we've had since the big drought. And this graph on the left, the orange bars show at El Rio, north of Oxnard, at Lake Piru, and at Santa Paula. The orange bars show what average rainfall is, and you can see the blue bars, which stick up higher, indicate what the rainfall we had in 2019. So good news, about 30% greater rainfall than average. And flows in the Santa Clara River, they're shown on the right. You can see 2019, sorry, let me see if I can go over there. 2019 here, that's higher than average flows, maybe the 60th percentile or so. So we had good rainfall, and as you might expect, good flow in the river, that we were able to divert some water from that. Because of that, In the spring, we had excess water stored in Lake Castaic, which we released. We had 19,000 acre feet. And let's see, is that a correct map? Yeah, that's it. Good. At Lake Castaic. So we released 19,000 acre feet that we've been building up storage credits there for some time. And unfortunately for us down here in the Oxnard Plain, almost all that water infiltrated into not Lake Piru, but into Piru Basin, way upstream from here, up around the town of Piru. So it was good for them. They were in pretty dire straits too, but we didn't get much water down here. So later in the year, this summer, let's see if I can get that one to go. Here we go. We were able to release 38,000 acre feet from Lake Piru, and that included 15,000 acre feet of water that we purchased from the state water project, and were supported on with a grant from the Fox Canyon GMA. They purchased 15,000 acre feet, or they reimbursed us for 15,000 acre feet of that, so to the tune of $3 million. Because the Fox Canyon GMA was paying for that, we really wanted to make sure we got it down here to the Oxnard Plain, and it didn't all just infiltrate into the Fillmore or Piru basins. So we timed it right when the basins were pretty full, the upper river basins were pretty full of water, and we ran a lot of water through there. And let's see how this will go. Yeah. So even though some water went into the other basins, like 10,600 in Piru and 5,800 into Fillmore and so on, we were actually able to divert 17,000 acre feet to our spreading grounds in the forebay, which is basically part of the Oxnard Basin, and another 1,200 acre feet had to go past the Freeman Diversion Dam. We had to let it pass, but it infiltrated into the ground, into the riverbed. Also in the forebay. So it all benefited. It's basically there were 18,300 acre feet of benefit that occurred to the Oxnard Plain groundwater basin. And that water flows over into Pleasant Valley Basin. So it's all good, helpful. Sounds really positive. I think I'll just skip this little graph. It's just not that important. And so what that means, it sounds great. I just want to point out here, the blue line is how much we divert during an average water year, starting in October at 0, and we just keep diverting more and more water through the year, sometimes more, in summer it's less. So during an average water year, we divert about 60,000 acre feet. During the last several years, we should have been able to divert about 60,000 acre feet. I said water year 2019 was pretty good. Actually, though, because of some restrictions on our diversions, it was less. We were able to divert less than we would even during an average year. So even though it was an above average rainfall year and we had above average flows, we actually ended up coming in only being able to divert a little less than 40,000 acre feet, which is unfortunate. That's the way it goes sometimes. The worst water year on record in our history at Freeman Diversion, we essentially were just able to divert about 1,000 acre feet. That was 2016, the red line on the graph. And then during 1990, is that 93? Yeah. My eyes aren't that perfect anymore. It was a banner water year, and we were able to divert 130,000 acre feet. So we want more years like that. We have to depend on Mother Nature to give us a spectacular year. The reason that we were able to divert less water than average, even though it was an above average water year, two factors. One is because the whole state is so dry, water that normally would have been flowing down the river during an average water year, it naturally infiltrated some of those basins that have been dried out by 5 years of drought. So that was some of it. But also we had restrictions for fish passage at Freeman Diversion that restricted when and how we could divert. So we're working with NIMS to try to come up with a new fish passage design that will not only be good for the fish, but it will allow us to return to our traditional or our historical diversion rates. And we think we've got a good compromise that will be good for everybody, the people of the plain as well as the fish. So we're moving forward on that. So I'm going to show some complex graphs here. These are hydrographs shown on a map that basically show water level over time. And what these will do is illustrate where we stand today in terms of the groundwater elevation in the basin. And remember I said that, I'll hold off on this. Remember I said that when groundwater elevations drop below sea level, that means that seawater can pour into the basin. That's bad news, no doubt about it. So we want to try to keep groundwater elevations as high as we can, or at least above sea level. And sea level in each of these graphs is shown as the 0 line. It's kind of a dark line. And let's see if I can move down here. Yeah, there we go. So kind of in the middle of the graph, there's a dark line that represents 0. That's sea level. We want the water level shown with the blue line to remain above that. And these graphs go back to 1930 and 1940 in some cases. See, generally they're above. They commonly dip down to or even below sea level during droughts, but they spend most of their time above. So that's what we want to do. We want to keep them above. And you can see at the very end of the graph, that represents this year where groundwater elevations have started bouncing back up in the forebay, and that's good news. That means the groundwater elevations are rising back to where they should be, well above sea level.
I had a question.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So when the salt water fuses into the fresh water, does it contaminate the water, or how do they take the salt water that's mixed in with the regular water? Or
So-
does that happen? I don't know.
Yeah, it has happened. Wells, so groundwater, the seawater intrusion front, as we call it, it's kind of this zone where seawater has displaced fresh water in the aquifer, filled the aquifer up with salt water. When that reaches wells, people can't drink that water, and you can't put it on crops. It's even worse for crops than it is for people. So basically, those wells have to shut down, and people drill new wells farther inland ahead of that front. But it's a very slow process. So seawater intrusion has been identified since the 1930s or 40s on the plain, and not too many wells have had to be shut down, and we're not seeing, it's not dozens of wells that are getting shut down like this year. In the lower aquifer system, which is under the greatest threat, the seawater intrusion front moves at maybe 200 to 400 feet per year when we have these drought conditions. In the upper aquifer system, they can move faster. The seawater intrusion can move faster inland, but we have less of a problem in that aquifer. The groundwater elevations are generally high enough that they prevent seawater intrusion, except in the worst conditions like we have back now. So the seawater intrusion moves in, groundwater elevations rise back up during wet years, and it pushes that seawater back out towards the coast, is the concept. And then I just wanted to show some graphs. This is farther out on the Oxnard Plain, getting closer towards Oxnard, and it's a little north of Port Hueneme. But the point is, and two of these wells are in the lower aquifer system, which have the biggest problems. The point of this graph is that the lower aquifer system graphs, the one in the upper right and the lower left, groundwater elevations have been below sea level in those wells, in those aquifers, basically since the 1950s. And so that's where we've had this very slow, steady seawater intrusion that the Fox Canyon GMA is working hard on a plan to reverse. But it's slow, luckily. And to answer your question, Councilmember Rollins, the minute, it's not like seawater or the groundwater elevation drop below 0 and suddenly it's displaced by seawater. It takes a long time for the seawater to slowly infiltrate through the aquifer. So it's not an immediate threat when groundwater elevations drop below sea level, but it's indicative of an approaching problem that needs to be resolved. So the lower river basins are basically the Oxnard Plain and Pleasant Valley. They're still significantly depleted. We haven't been able to supply them with enough water. This represents available storage, this line. We basically like to keep groundwater elevations high enough that we're out of the red. That represents groundwater elevations above sea level. And you can see at the very right side of the graph, in 2019, we were able to bring groundwater elevations up quite a bit, but it was just above the red zone, and now it's dropped back in. So it's a good thing that we were able to deliver water, the amount of water that we did deliver, but was it enough? Not quite yet. We're going to need a few more wet years to really get things back to where they need to be. Mm-hmm.
And you attribute that to increased usage, or what do you attribute that to?
Yeah, so it's partly it's that we haven't had water to divert in the last 5 years of the drought, or very little water to divert during the drought, and that's a normal cycle. You can live with that. The other thing that happens during these droughts, when we don't have surface water to deliver, that means people are more dependent on groundwater. So during a drought, there's a couple of things going on. Like I said, there's no rainfall falling, so people have to apply more water from other sources to crops. and they don't have any other sources. So then they pump groundwater even harder. So I've got a couple graphs here that'll show, I think, that people are doing a lot to help alleviate that problem, but there's no way around the fact that when there's no other sources of water, we have to pump groundwater a little harder here. So, and then I just wanted to point out real quick, this shows water quality, and it's a topic that Robert will be touching on in a few minutes in terms of iron and manganese, but in terms of nitrate, also a question or a problem up in the Phwa Bay area and affecting the OH supply wells. We have nitrate that we sometimes have to worry about. We don't want the nitrate concentrations to rise all the way to the top of this graph, or 45 milligrams per liter, for health reasons and for regulatory reasons. And when we were able to do, let's see if I can get this graph. Yeah, good. Oh, this is the graph I wanted to show. Sorry, I had an extra one in there. Yeah, we don't want nitrate levels to rise to the very top of this graph. We want them to be as low as possible. And the long-term average nitrate levels have been 17.4, so a very safe level of nitrate. But during the drought, they were higher. When we were able to add that 15,000 acre-feet plus of water from Lake Piru in the mid-2019 period, you can see those nitrate levels dropping from about 35 milligrams per liter down almost back to the average. Unfortunately, they started coming back up, but once we can get more water in there, we can dilute nitrate, healthier for everybody, and yeah, it'll be good when we can get more water going. The nitrate concentrations have not risen up to the old levels of 35 milligrams per liter or higher that we had during the worst part of the drought. Now that we're entering winter, hopefully we can keep them lower and knock them back even farther. So to summarize this section of the talk, the water year 2019, I just want to say we had an above average year for rainfall and runoff or surface flows. Our supplemental purchase of water, that state water project water from Article 21, which by the way was very inexpensive, $200 an acre foot. We were able to discharge or to divert 15,000 acre feet of that water into the area of the OH well field in the Phwa Bay. That was our first opportunity for significant releases since 2012. And even though our upper basins are almost fully recovered, our area is still below average, still significantly depleted, and we need to keep working on that. And finally, for my part of this, before I let Robert up here, what does the future hold? I'll just touch on a couple things here. This graph shows current reservoir conditions throughout the state, and we're in pretty good state. We're in pretty good conditions right now. Most of the reservoirs in California, for the first time in 5 years, have either average or even above average storage in them, or they have, they're full of water. They don't have available storage. They're nearly full, like Shasta and Oroville and some of the others. So great news on that front. We're hopeful that we can potentially purchase more of that really cheap Article 21 water this winter. And maybe get water from some of our neighbors. A lot of agencies around us, like Santa Clarita Valley, they have more water than they can use. And so if we can purchase some of their water, we'll do so and try to divert some of it down here to the Phwa Bay. Some of you may be aware of the Fox Canyon GMA working on groundwater sustainability plans, or GSPs, including one for the Oxnard Basin. This is timely. On July 24th, they released review draft GSPs for public review. Public comments were due on the 23rd, and quite a few folks submitted comments. November 8th, they're going to discuss, the Fox Canyon GMA at their board meeting are going to discuss those public comments and how they're going to respond to them, figure out what they want to do. On December 13th, the GMA board is going to consider adoption of those GSPs. Hopefully they'll make a few revisions, improvements after November 8th and before December 13th. But the bottom line is they have to submit groundwater sustainability plans to DWR, the Department of Water Resources, by January 31st. That's an absolute drop-dead date, so that's what they're working towards. And I'll just touch on I just have a couple more quick slides here to describe the situation there in terms of the groundwater sustainability plans. In 2015, the average, they're basing their groundwater sustainability plans of usage on the average from 2005 to 2014. Our region, Oxnard Plain Basin and Pleasant Valley Basin combined, used about 144,000 acre feet of water during that period. Now, some of that was imported state water project water. It didn't come from groundwater, but a whole lot of it was groundwater. Of course, that's supplying 400,000 people plus 35,000 acres of farmland. And just want to touch on where that water comes from. Here's the specific. So almost 20,000 acre feet comes from state water project imports through the canals. We get some from local surface water that United delivers and that Pleasant Valley gets from Conejo Creek. There's a little bit of recycled water. That's the other that barely shows up on the graph. Sustainable groundwater provides the bulk of our water supply, but we're pumping a little bit beyond what's sustainable. So my graph is intended here to show, hey, we're pumping also some of the groundwater is unsustainable. So presumably this GSP, it looks like it's going to say, no, you can't continue to pump that 40,000 acre feet of water. So we're probably going to have a 40,000 acre foot shortfall or gap that's going to need to be filled. And I think that's what's going to come out of the Fox Canyon GMA's process. In fact, that's what their plans specifically state. On the plus side, this graph shows total water use since 1980 for that same region, Pleasant Valley and Oxnard basins. And there's a positive story here. If you normalized it, if every year was an average rainfall year, this is what people's water use would look like total. This is combined agriculture and M&I, or municipal and industrial use. And you can see we've been on this downward trend since roughly 1992 that looks really good. People are using less and less water. Municipal water use, you're a municipality, so I just wanted to touch on where your water comes from. The blue lines at the bottom are blue graphs. It's state water project imports, and that's remained relatively stable at 20,000 acre feet per year. And then there's a tiny bit of other water that barely shows up in there, just above the blue line. And then the green line represents groundwater pumping that the cities basically rely on the Oxnard Plain and Pleasant Valley Basin. And also shown with the dots are our population growth since 1985. So even though the population has increased, total water use has remained relatively stable, which is stunning. And then when the total population stabilized around 2007, the time of the Great Recession, people stopped building, people stopped moving in. Groundwater use actually declined significantly. So our population increased 100,000 people from 1980. Water use stayed stable, and actually the last 12 years, we're using 10,000 acre feet per year less water for M&I purposes today than we were just 12 years ago. So good on the cities. And for what it's worth, agriculture shows a similar overall long-term trend of declining water use. And in the last 12 years, it looks like they're using about 5,000 acre feet per year less water. So good news. And the other good news I just wanted to touch on real quick before I let Robert go, I'm going to show the Oxnard Plain. These are the water projects proposed in the Fox Canyon GMA's groundwater sustainability plan for the different basins up there in West Las Posas. They want to bring in more imported state water project water in Pleasant Valley Basin next door. They want to do some fallowing. Of course, agriculture is not super thrilled about that. Here in the Oxnard Basin, they also have proposed about 500 acre feet per year of fallowing. Oxnard's got some recycled water they want to apply. That could bring up our supplies by 9,000 acre feet. And we at United want to expand our Freeman diversion so we can bring in an additional 5,000 acre feet of water per year. Now, you may recall I said we have a 40,000 acre foot per year shortfall, so this doesn't quite make up for that. Other people have projects. Ventura is going to bring in water with their state water project interconnection. And United would like to propose some more projects moving pumping away from the coast where the seawater intrusion is worse. That should increase the sustainable yield by a couple thousand acre feet. We are working on design of a brackish water treatment plant. And that's water that's a mix of salt water and fresh water, so not quite as energy intensive as seawater desal. It also build a barrier to seawater intrusion. That could add 15,000 acre feet to our supply. And then we have another project we call ASAP, which involves a direct pipeline from Lake Piru and purchase some more water from our neighbors that could bring in another 7,000 acre feet. So that 40,000 acre feet per year shortfall that we're all afraid of, well, between conservation and these projects, we're hopeful that by the time we have to be sustainable in 2020, we can actually be there. We'll have projects to supply it and people will be conserving water. And I'm going to leave before I let Robert up here with a quote from John F. Kennedy. The time to repair the roof is when the sun is shining. I'm actually hoping for rainy weather. But yeah, even if it rains, let's throw this on its head here, and it starts raining and we start getting all this water supply again like we're used to, United's used to, let's not forget that we need to keep building projects because droughts are going to return. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, John, for that introduction, and good afternoon, members of the Port Hueneme Water Agency Board. I'm Robert Richardson, Senior Engineer with the United Water Conservation District, and I'm here to present to you the iron and manganese treatment project, which we believe is an important drought resiliency and water quality enhancement project for the Oxnard-Hueneme pipeline system. So just a reminder of what the El Rio water treatment plant and groundwater recharge system and Oxnard-Hueneme pipeline system is. It's located in the Oxnard forebay, which John touched on earlier, and this is a location where we deliver surface water from the Freeman diversion and spread it in about 80 acres of recharge basins, and we're able to extract that water through a system of wells in the upper aquifer system and lower aquifer system, and deliver that to several customers, namely City of Oxnard, Port Hueneme Water Agency, the Rio School District, and several mutual water companies. Part of the reason this site was selected back in the 50s is that it had great recharge capabilities, and United had a purpose, which was to move pumping inland and to help mitigate the effects of seawater intrusion. So the El Rio water treatment plant consists of 12 wells, 9 in the upper aquifer system and 3 in the lower aquifer system. It is essentially a slow sand filtration system, so most of the wells have a sanitary seal that goes down 100 feet. And we disinfect with chlorine, and we add ammonia to match chloramines that's present in the State Water Project water. We have a booster system that can produce up to 32,000 GPM. We have both electric and natural gas. Natural gas is available in the event of emergency. And our pipeline is about 12 miles long. It goes from 42 inches down to 24 inches. And we have a pipeline capacity of about 23 or 24,000 GPM. The current allocation for the system is about 12,000 acre-feet per year, and that's through Fox Canyon GMA temporary extraction allocation ordinance. So real quick to define the project. So in times of drought, we experience increasing nitrate concentrations in our upper aquifer system wells. And that poses a challenge for us to deliver water that meets all the drinking water standards. We prefer to use the upper aquifer system wells as much as possible because they are less expensive to operate. They require less energy to extract water. But they are sensitive to droughts. And so during droughts, we leverage our lower aquifer system wells. But these wells have iron and manganese contamination that's naturally occurring. They also have an issue with a high silt density index, which creates problems for the downstream Brackish water treatment plant system that Port Hueneme Water Agency operates. But the fact of these wells is that they are extremely reliable during droughts, but they are more expensive to operate. So what's our strategy during drought events? To eliminate the iron and manganese in the lower aquifer system by building treatment and blending with our upper aquifer system to help reduce the cost of energy to deliver water. I apologize, we were here in April, so this might be a kind of revisiting what you already saw in the presentation. But today we have a new site layout. Currently the system as it stands, we have a 3,500 GPM system that consists of 2 filter vessels. We could expand up to 8,500 GPM, which is the capacity, the full capacity of our 3 lower aquifer system wells. And that system will, let's As we put raw water into these filter vessels, we'll hit with chlorine, and that chlorine will oxidize and be removed by the filters. And we'll also be, and I'll talk about this in a minute, recycling some of the decant from our backwash tank and blending that with the raw processed water. Our backwash operation, we start by draining the filter vessels. This is something that we learned in pilot testing to improve the operation, is that we needed air scour to help loosen up the media, extends the media life, and helps in the removal of accumulated solids. And we'll be using our own OH water to backwash the filter vessels, so that's chloraminated water. And the backwash water will end up in the wash water recovery tank. So on the wash water recovery, we'll have a 195,000 gallon tank where we will be able to decant the water. We'll again recycle it back into the process. This is anywhere from 0.5% to 1.5% of the actual flow into the treatment plant. And we are still working on sludge removal options, whether we send that to the sewer or whether we haul that off-site. But we will have about 32 to 40 pounds a day of sludge to deal with. These are concentrated metals that exist within the Lower Aquifer system. It's not looking promising to send this to a sewer, so we might be sending this to Oxnard's wastewater treatment plant, mixing with biosolids, or sending it to a landfill off-site. This is what the filter vessels, an example of what they'll look like. This is actually in Washington. They'll be about 40 feet long and 12 feet in diameter. And here's an example of a wash water recovery tank. This appears to be about a 42-foot tank, and it will have a floating decanter. So where have we been and where are we going? So in February and April of 2016, we kicked off the project with our Oxnard-Hueneme user meetings. We also started our pilot plant. Lane Christensen operated that. That was a Green Sand Plus and Lanox system, and we were able to demonstrate the capabilities of both medias, and we selected a media at that time. We also completed the feasibility study in 2016, submitted this to all the users. And then there was a little bit of a gap as the OH users agreement was being renegotiated. And as those discussions closed, in 2018, we continued this process with more users meetings. We hired a design consultant, Kenny Jenks, in July 2018. At which point we conducted another pilot study, and that was to characterize the sludge that's generated from the plant. In March 2019, this was right before we made our first presentation to your board, we completed the 30% design, which is what our current budget is based on. And we had another OH user meeting, and currently today we are at the 90% design level. And on my desk right now is about 100 sheets of plans and about 1,000 pages of specifications. So we're spending time to make sure that this is going to be a quality product and a quality plant, and we're spending time to make sure it's right. We're also spending time working on funding. So the 30% design was $5.7 million. We're currently working on the 90% design estimate. And we did secure a grant through the Bureau of Reclamation in the amount of $300,000 under the 2018 Water Smart program. We're currently working on a $2.5 million application with DWR's Integrated Regional Water Management Grant Program. That's through Watershed Coalition of Ventura County. We have been shortlisted with 4 other projects, and so we're optimistic about that. We might also explore Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. So again, as I mentioned, we're at 90% design, and we plan to have a final package by the end of this year. We could have completed it sooner, but we are waiting on funding, and the applications for the IRWIMP process is due December 6th, with awards expected to be announced in spring of 2020. So we can't start construction without finding out what the results are from that process. We also completed all the geotech work. We are working on CEQA NEPA. Right now, the determination, which is supported by our consultant, is that the project is exempt under categorical exemption. What's interesting to know is that John mentioned energy usage, and one of the criteria that DWR uses is climate change impacts. And so we know that the State Water Project water has been reported to be about 3,250 kilowatt hour per acre foot delivered to the county. Our system is anywhere from 250 to 500, depending on what wells we're blending. So it is a much more cost-effective system. And with that, are there any questions?
Are there any questions? Yes, Jacobson.
Couple questions. First, when this plant is online, will that impact the amount of ammonia that you add in your distribution system?
No, it will not.
So that system will stay as is? Okay.
Right.
And then secondly, the funding. At what point in the project do we stop seeking other funds or grants, and the project cost or project total would be brought on to the users?
So we plan on proceeding with or without the DWR grant approval. So construction will start next year. That is the plan.
Okay. So at what point potentially could we get half the significant savings to all the users for the plant? The 2.5 million. Is there a due date, or is that something that we could be reimbursed if they do agree with the Prop 1 funding?
So it would be all reimbursed. All our construction expenses would be reimbursed. So I'm sorry I don't have an answer for you today, but if we get the grant, we expect to stay within budget, which has been adopted by our board and is the current rates.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Any more questions? I have a couple of questions here. So, so you're saying that you'll move forward in 2020 whether we have more of these funds available or not. What's the expected range of once you break ground to then be online?
So we are expecting about 18 months of construction. So it's probably about a year of construction and another 6 months of startup and testing.
Okay. And then maybe you provided it earlier. How much more water will we have more water, or will it just be cleaner water?
No, it's not going to produce any new water for the system. We still have an allocation that is our limit. That might change in the future with Fox Canyon GMA activities. But this basically ensures that production will always be there, even in times of drought.
Yeah, so then for us, for this end-use group, it would be where we could possibly end up using less of the supplemental water that we take because yours is cleaner. We can run it through. Like for the city, we could run it through our treatment facility and be clean, right?
Correct. So removing the iron and manganese will directly impact what's known as your silt density index and will prevent fouling of your RO membranes. So you'll be able to operate your plant as we're operating our lower aquifer system wells.
Okay. Question? Yes.
What does the term fouling mean?
RO membranes have a tendency to foul with particulate.
FOUL.
It's a term used in the industry. So as particulates accumulate on the membrane surface, they begin to
Get dirty.
foul, and then you get lower flux rates. And
Oh, okay.
yeah.
It's like
I've seen
clogging.
I've seen
Clogging.
follow used,
Clog-
FALLOW used.
Oh, right, that is like when you stop irrigating farmland, basically you shut down
And then it
farmland.
follows and
But
yeah,
this is-
it just,
This is fouling, so yeah, it's like clogging the filter.
Exactly.
And wells can foul also.
It's a
okay,
bad thing.
okay, gotcha. Got a little confused.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
okay.
Two terms.
These are
Yeah.
technical terms.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for your presentation.
I guess it's
I
prize,
was
all
gonna
right?
say,
Thank you.
what's the
Oh, yeah,
prize?
that's right. Huh.
Shall we say?
Okay, what is that?
It is
Something for water?
a rain gauge.
All right, good.
So now I'll be very accurate. Next year, I'll have a rain gauge to
A
know
rain
exactly.
gauge, there you go.
Good job.
We appreciate you coming and presenting to this group. Thank you so much. So with that, let's move on to items number 2 and 3 under consent agenda. And so item number 2 is minutes of the Water Agency regular meeting of September the 16th, 2019. And then number 3, finance cash disbursements for September 7, 2019 through October 11, 2019. Is there a motion to move on the consent agenda items?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
maybe the link was messed up for myself when I attempted to download the minutes from the September meeting. It showed up with June, so I wasn't able to review them. I'm sorry I didn't call in advance. I was looking at that last minute after I looked at everything else.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if other members had a chance to review the September meeting minutes.
Oh, well, it's in here, but, okay. Okay.
Is it linked to September?
But it-
Are they supposed to be in our packet?
Did you?
Oh,
So, sorry.
okay.
You guys go ahead.
It's all right. So would anybody else then want to move on the consent agenda?
I'll go ahead and move to approve the consent agenda.
Is there a second?
Sure, second.
Second, all right. Motion moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Abstain?
I'll abstain.
Okay.
Are you abstaining from both or just the water agency minutes?
Thank you for the clarification. I'll just abstain from the water agency minute.
Thank you.
Okay. So is that okay for what we took for the vote? All right, super. And then now we move on to business item number 4, facilities condition assessment. This is a presentation,
Yes.
Mr. City Manager.
Yes, thank you, Chair. We have a presentation this evening from Ryan Gallagher, who you will recognize from previous efforts. He now is with the Ventura-based firm of MKN.
Very good.
MKN Engineering, but he's finishing up this project under Gannett Fleming, which is the firm that he was previously with and that the contract was awarded to. And he'll walk us through that presentation, and then we'll have an opportunity for questions and some further discussion after that.
And then before I get started, I know there was a time constraint. Just to clarify, how long should I try to keep this to?
Yeah, so we have to be out of here by 5:30.
Correct.
And after you, we do have another presentation. So would everybody be okay if we split it up maybe and do 15-15 maximum?
Although I
Or
think
is it like
Don's
10-10 and 5?
Is the last remaining one? I'm without my PHWA agent. Is it Don's? Yeah.
Okay, great. So
Perfect.
you have about 10, 12 minutes maybe?
That's perfect.
Okay.
Okay. So thanks for the introduction. Before I get started, just because this is the end of the facility master plan effort, I do want to just congratulate the board on taking us through this process, but also to recognize the staff. It was great working with Rod and Don, Pete with Channel Islands. These efforts require a lot of staff time, and I know they're all very busy, and so we really appreciate all their effort in getting the materials to us and being part of the process, because that's very important. Okay. So real quickly, what I'm going to go over in the next 10 to 12 minutes is the overview of the project drivers, what led us down to this path, why did we go down through a condition assessment and master plan, so give the board a little bit of background, and then I'll just overview on the key pieces of the final results. So the first one is project drivers. Specifically for PHWA, there was a few that we actually are very timely, we heard about today. So you could see that first one, that's sigma uncertainty. So you saw with the changing water supply conditions in the county, there's going to be a reduction in the amount of groundwater that's available to PHWA. And so it was the foresight of the board back in 2017, seeing this coming down the road, they wanted to be prepared for what that was going to do to both the cost of operating the facility and also to understand clearly what the picture is. How much water are we short? What's the total dollar amount? Should we invest? And so they saw the need for doing this master plan. There's also a few other drivers that really are typical for any master plan. You do have an aging facility. We're over 20 years old. And so there's going to be a need for capital rehab and replacement. Budget planning is another key driver. It's important when you're looking at your rates and to understand what the total cost of this investment is. Staff transitions. This is not something unique to PHWA. This is something that all agencies are facing across Southern California. There's just retirements. It's difficult to get staff, and so you see this turnover. And so a master plan can really give you that consistency as you move from staff into transition. And then the last one was opportunities to improve. A lot of what's in this master plan is actually not repair and rehab. It's actually optimization. So that's a good thing. That's going to lower your cost to operate. So finally, just one step further back. So this did start in 2017, as I mentioned. There was a phase one, which was really involved the whole board, and it was looking at what does the board want to do? What are they interested in? And ultimately, continuing at the Brackish water facility was one of the higher rated items. And then we took a short break as we waited for Sigma to go through its process so we could better understand where the water supply was going to land. This is just an overview of the process. In general, we started with a condition assessment and a water supply analysis. Those were two separate tasks. And the staff made a really great point that really these are the two major pieces of a master plan. So we went ahead and combined it into such so that you kind of had this tool that you could utilize going forward. And there's the general overview of the schedule. It's about a 6-month process. These are the key elements of the facility master plan. So it starts with the facility background, which I'll give a little more detail on. But this is really important because the agency did not have a master plan to date. So there isn't a single document that you could hand to a new staff person, say your new water general manager or a new city manager, that they could read through and really understand where the plant is and what the needs are. The next two pieces, the water supply and condition assessment, those were those individual efforts I talked about earlier that we had combined. Water supply is self-explanatory, and so is condition assessment. Those get combined into the 5-year CIP. This is really the piece that's going to plug into your budget and is going to give that game plan to the staff to just start implementing projects. So on the facility background, as I mentioned, the importance is to have this baseline. And so you can see there was a number of figures that we had put together that help explain how the process works, what infrastructure is actually out there that PHWA is utilizing to meet the service needs of its member agencies. These were not documents that were easily accessible before, so we constructed these from as-builts that had been accruing over a period of time. So these are really valuable. As an engineer, we love picking up documents like this because we can quickly understand what the issues are. The water supply model, I think this is going to be probably the most helpful tool, and I think the presentations you just saw the last 30 minutes really explain why. What that's showing you right there is our dashboard. This Excel-based model allows the PHWA, as your conditions change, as your water supply changes, as grants come in and we start to understand what the true cost of the iron and manganese projects we heard about, you can plug those numbers into this model and you can start to see how does this impact my available water supply? How does this impact my total cost of water? And now you can actually look at scenarios in real time. And so what you see on the top of that dashboard, those are all scroll functions that allow you to change some of these metrics. And then right below that is what's coming out of the model. So you can see groundwater supply and then cost of water. So it's a really great tool to be able to kind of see how these different changes are impacting you. Specifically for this, we used $125 per acre foot for the iron and manganese project. We just heard today that 50% of those costs may come from grants. Okay, so now we can slide back 125 to say 90 and kind of see what that does. So it's going to be a really helpful tool. Finally, as we started to plug in some different scenarios just as a starting point, we got a lot of information back to the model. This is the table that came out of, oh, sorry. This is the table that came out of that analysis, and I'll just give you the highlights. Basically, the groundwater supply, we're going to be at a deficit. To operate how we currently do today, we won't be able to sustain that operation. The amount of groundwater we use to import water is going to have to change because our groundwater supplies are going down. And so you can see what that shortfall is. You can see by 25 years, you're talking about 2,000 to 2,900. And what that's going to mean is we're going to have to use more imported water, which means costs go up. We looked at some different scenarios and found, I'll try to summarize as quick as possible, we are going to have a short-term increase in groundwater. That's what's going to happen through the GSP. And so what we want to do is we want to look at ways that we can increase in the short term our use of groundwater, because that's our cheapest source of supply for PHWA. And so there's some projects that outlined some simple ways to do that. And then for long term, what this analysis showed us is if you look at the difference between scenario 1 and scenario 4, those are the exact same demands. But for scenario 4, we showed that you could do an investment of $1 million, increase your recovery, meaning you're decreasing the amount of water you're sending to your brine. And what that allows you to do is actually lower your overall net present value, meaning it's a better investment in the long term to spend money up front, but increase your efficiency at the plant. And so that's the kind of scenarios we can look at with this model. It helps us to guide our investment going forward. And it can tell us, yes, this investment makes sense if it delivers X amount of efficiency. Condition assessment results, we had a structural, electrical instrumentation, process, and mechanical engineers all come to the site. We did an all-day visit and documented about 50 projects. This is the breakdown. It's $2.43 million over 5 years. You can see the bulk of that lies in process. I listed some of the key projects there, mainly related to replacing your membranes. In the capital improvement plan, we then broke those $2.43 million and put that over 5 years. And you can see the year 1 and year 2 are really the priority projects. These are the ones we talked with staff. These are the ones that have an impact if you need to start now, essentially. I mentioned the benefit of capturing more groundwater in these initial years. So those projects were prioritized. And then we developed these project sheets that have a photo, a description, a justification. It gives the staff the ability to understand what the project is and be able to move quickly into it because the information they need to do so is there. These are just some of the detailed projects. If we had time, I was going to walk through these. I do want to point out a couple because I did mention there's some are optimization and some are rehab. So you can see P3 there under year 1, that's membrane replacement. The membranes are essentially, you're not even operating one of your skids because the membranes are they're failed. We talked about fouling.
Are they at the end of their useful life?
They're well beyond it. You got quite a bit of mileage out of those. You about twice. I mean, you're running 20 years, I think. Typically, you'd see 10 years. So, but the water's really clean that you're treating, so you would expect a little bit more, but yes, you've gotten your useful life plus some. The hydraulic analysis is one where we may be able to lower the cost of operation. So that's a helpful study. The arc flash is a safety. Removing the fluoride system, this is something that we talked about with the member agencies. This could reduce cost right away. And so just wanted to give you a flavor that there's projects here that can reduce your operating costs. They're not all just rehab. And then finally, the next steps. So you've got the final master plan. I believe we sent the hard copies over so you can distribute those amongst the member agencies. You'd want to take those projects. Obviously, there may be some fine-tuning as you proceed down into the details year by year, but you've got the projects and the budgets to start with, so you'd want to work that into the budget. Number 3 is important. This is not the end of the road. This is really, we're at the beginning. We've now laid out the path, and now we have to execute. You need to utilize that model. As the conditions change, you need to go back, look at the model, see what that's doing. You don't need to do it all the time, but if there's major changes, for example, we heard January 31st, we're going to have the final numbers. Let's plug those in, see what that looks like. Investigate long-term water supply options. We know we have a long-term shortage. It's not something we need to solve next year, but it's something that we need to be engaged with our regional partners to make sure we have a seat at the table if there are opportunities, and there are some in the area. And then finally is the implementation. I mentioned there's 50 projects here. These are going to require, some of these can be done using in-house capabilities. All of them will require the support and participation of in-house capabilities, but you're also going to need some outside support to execute these projects. I listed some different ways that you can do that. What I would recommend, just given the mix of projects, is probably more like that first bullet. It would be a program manager role, and that would give you some flexibility so that you could go a task-by-task basis as you execute the projects. It allows the consultant to work with staff too. You have a very engaged and knowledgeable staff, and so you'd want to leverage that. But you just need the outside expertise as well for a number of the projects. Was that 12 minutes?
Yeah, you're about that time.
All
Let's
right.
see if there are any questions from the board. Any questions? Yes.
Thank you for a quick run-through of a great deal of information. You did a great job in trying to keep it under the time frame. I think this is important for PHWA going forward, and I really appreciate the final slide here, in that we know that there's going to be some staff transition. We'll miss you, Rod, but I appreciate the comment of the consistency and not letting the work and the investment that's gone down here go away. So I would like to see us, if there's some way today for us to at least give staff some direction as to how we keep this moving forward without making the ultimate commitment, because I still have some questions, would like a chance to study. This was pretty quickly ran through, and as Ryan mentioned, the presentation we saw earlier today, if the iron and manganese facility is built, my assumption is your guys' evaluation on efficiency may not have taken into account what the water quality may or may not be. After that, we can all make some decisions with knowing that there may be some increased water quality on the OH pipeline. Our plant today, operating 100% efficient, if it produces 3 million gallons of water a day, throws 1 million gallons of water away to produce that. Is there some way for us to look at what is the water quality we want to send out to our constituents? That's another question, and that speaks directly to the supply shortage that's referenced in this. So I think we have some questions that we could answer, some policy-wide decisions for one another, but certainly we don't need to hold up a process of engaging, asking staff to reach out and maybe bring us a program manager or a combination of the program manager and someone who's going to handle making sure this moves forward with board direction in it. So if I'm trying to be quick, I have a lot more to say, but stick to your time frame. I would like to make a motion that we direct staff to bring us back a proposal for a program manager to work with both the staff and further policy development with the board to make sure that we do move forward with these things, just giving us an opportunity to adequately evaluate what's really in the bulk of this report and what our priorities are going forward for the rehab. So that'd be my motion, that we direct staff to bring us back a proposal for a program manager, and whether that's contracted in-house. I think probably contracted, given you guys got a lot else to do. That can keep us on task with the program here. So that'd be my motion.
All right. So there's a motion. Sarah?
I agree, so I'll second that.
Okay. And any further discussion? I think you're just, you're mentioning we need to move forward on this, and so what are the next steps? And
I'd
this
like
is
to
one
make
of the
sure, especially
first
while we
things.
still have Rod here and other folks that have been involved, to help try and keep that consistency and get it in place prior to his departure as well.
Okay, all right. Motion is on the table, seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? All right, motion carries. So direction to city staff to...
Yeah, that's perfect.
move
We
this
actually
forward?
had spoken earlier today, Mr. Gallagher and I met, and I think it's important that we really bring back at that November meeting something tangible that we can then move forward on, so that we don't lose the momentum that has been developed by this study. So we're definitely supportive of the direction that the board has given us.
Okay, super. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, so let's move on then to, what do we have? Item number 5, Brackish Water Reclamation Demonstration Facility.
Good afternoon, Board. A couple of things. I want to thank Mr. Gallagher for a good presentation. It was good working with him. Before we go into the Brackish Water, I'm going to just make a couple of comments. Right, we're going to have to move forward on this, and there's a number of key projects that have to go forward, and we will be coming back in November as the board has directed. So we will be doing that. Again, as Mr. Gallagher said, and I think as an agency, as a city, we all have to get behind regional projects that can solve or provide more local water. There's a number of those. There's a possibility that the Groundwater Management Agency is going to take the first 5 years and not start our ramp down. And because our ramp down could be mitigated by regional projects that come online. And the thought process is to look at some regional projects that can soften the ramp down to a sustainable drawdown of our water basins. And there are some out there. And I know Jared is probably the one on the board that has probably the most intimate knowledge of some of those projects that are potentially out there. And I think as a water agency, it's a regional problem, and we all have to lend our voice and our support to those, because that's what's going to solve our water problem so that we can still sustain economic vitality in the area and not be water starved. So that's my little pitch before I get into this. And again, we'll be working with Brian on that, on some of those things. Good news, for the last month of September, our plant was in operation. Our SDI, silt density index, never exceeded 2. The threshold for shutting down the membranes is 3. We ranged between 0.6 and 2, so that was a very good month again. And we also, for the month of September, we had a water demand of 3.49 million gallons per day, and that was less than what we were using in August. In August, we had 3.55 million gallons per day. So we're starting to trend down, and that's not unexpected as the weather cools off and we go into the winter season. The board asked for some comparisons. Last September, our water demand was 3.41 million gallons per day. So this September, we were just slightly higher on our demand. And I will be reporting the previous year each month so that you can have a comparison of what we were using the previous year in the same month. And this month in September, United Water supplied approximately 76% of our water, and Cayugas was 24%. So we're still got that same amount of mix there, and certainly looking at ways to increase the efficiency, because we do put back water when we treat it. It's not 100% pass-through, so there is lost water, and that's what we're discharging to the brine line. And I've mentioned several times, early on, the PHWA got a tremendous deal with Cayugas because we discharge to the brine line at 0 cost. And for example, our friends in Camarillo that are building a reclamation plant are going to be charged somewhere in the neighborhood of $200 an acre foot to discharge into that brine line. So that is a valuable asset, and that was very good planning by our predecessor. So that's a great thing. I want to make sure everybody's really aware of that. The other thing is, one of the issues is, how long are we going to be out at that plant? I had originally said to 2028. I was told by our previous water manager, Mr. Steve Hickox, that it is 2036. I have not confirmed that yet. I am researching that, but I wanted to let you know that I may have been incorrect originally in stating that our lease ran through 2028. It may run all the way through 2036, and I'm looking into that now, because that has a big impact of what we're going to do with our capital program. So, are there any questions?
Are there any questions for staff? No? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Villafona. So we will receive and file this report. Budget update, item number 6.
Mr. Martinez and I are working on that, and we did get, we retained Mr. Hickox through Milner Via to give us some, because Mr. Hickox had great, historical knowledge of of PHWA, so it was very good to have him in and fill in some of the blank areas that we were struggling with. Now that we do have the facility assessment, we're going to be putting things together, and we'll be coming back in November for the presentation. And tomorrow, or Wednesday, Mr. Martinez and I are meeting to review the budget.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Villafona?
I'm
Yes,
just going to
Mr.
kind of
Sure.
repeat what I said at the last meeting, and while I appreciate that and the inclusiveness, I just ask that we be respectful of the fact when we keep saying we're going to include the facilities assessment in there. Perhaps that's for the coming budget year once we've had a chance to study what's in here. I would just feel very pressured if you all returned with the budget in January for us to adopt that, and we didn't have it, and all of this was included. So that would just be a comment that I would make.
To respond to that, what we're going to do is we're going to look at some of the critical items in the facility assessment, and those would be, not every item would be included in the budget, but what we feel between Mr. Martinez, myself, and the consultant, which would be the key items that we should go forward with. And that's what we'll be presenting.
Okay. All right, thank you. So we'll move on then to board members' reports, comments, and requests for future agenda items. No comments? No? All right. So then we'll adjourn the Port Hueneme Water Agency to the next regular meeting on Monday, November 18th, here at City Hall at 4 p.m. Thank you. We need to be set on the clock.
It's good to have somebody on the board that's an expert on this. I could see you looking through this, comparing the notes and analyzing it and stuff like that. Well, on the surface, it sounds good to me.